This week's lesson, we are going to be using dandelions to create our artwork. So I don't know if you have a whole bunch in your yard like I do, where you can just go and pick some. You may need to take a walk or go to a park and see what you can find. But this is definitely the time of year where these guys are everywhere. Now, some people think that these are weeds. I personally find them to be very beautiful. Dandelions have this bright, beautiful yellow color. We're actually going to use the pigment of the dandelion for our art project. Also, I want you guys to notice the texture of the dandelion. If you feel it, it's kind of soft. It's got these little tiny petals you guys can really see in there. Also, kind of ties into that Andy Goldsworthy lesson about nature and patterns in nature as well. So everything kind of radiates out of that center with these tiny little petals. You guys will also notice that down here, there's these little kind of spiky points. They're not sharp, but they come out from the bottom of the flower. When we look at the stem is sometimes this sort of greenish color, but it can also have this kind of pinkish brown in there too. So we're really going to observe the dandelion. I also grabbed some leaves. They're a little dirty. It's raining outside right now, but this is a really, really big one. And when the dandelion grows, the leaf doesn't come off the stem. It actually comes from the bottom. You'll notice when you guys are collecting these. I also grabbed a little dandelion bud so you guys can see. Now this one isn't quite open yet and is still a little closed in here. So a lot of things that I can look at for observation. I want you guys to notice the lines that you see. And we are going to create a composition using the dandelions to not only look at and observe, but also the color from them as well. Check it out. You guys are going to love this. To get started, you're going to want to have several dandelions near you. We're going to be using them to add color as well as to look at. So you're going to want to have a few, maybe like 3, 4, maybe even 5. You're going to get started by, we're actually going to hold them right here near the top, and we're going to kind of rub them into these sort of circular squishies that we're later going to add lines to turn into dandelions. So if you also want to make a bouquet, you're going to want to start by adding a few near the center of your paper. Maybe you want to play around with some other ways. Maybe you want to create a dandelion field. You can do any of those things. I'm going to show you how to use these dandelions for color. Here we go. Now, one might do the trick for your whole entire paper, but you might need to use a second or a third, which is why you want to have several, so you've got a few to look at when you're ready to draw. Look at how bright that dandelion yellow is. Now, once you've figured out how many dandelions you want to have in your composition, you really want to take a look at the dandelion. Remember that we're trying to capture the texture. The texture is how something feels. Now, obviously, we are doing this on paper, so we want to give the idea that it would feel that way. We want to make the viewer want to reach out and touch it as if it were an actual dandelion. So there's a couple different techniques that we can do. The first one I'm showing you is where it's almost like you're creating a firework that's radiating out of the center by adding some little short lines that keep growing and growing and growing. The second one is where you kind of do sort of like a zigzag line in a circle, and then you keep repeating it. So it starts small in the center and then gets bigger and bigger and bigger as you move on to the outside. Now you could try both of these techniques or use a combination of them, or maybe you come up with your own. Remember that the idea is to capture that texture of the dandelion. And just keep going. Go ahead and add texture to all of your yellow bursts, and then think about the stems and the leaves. You want to draw the stems so you can get color in them later. Look at the leaves and notice the shapes. Notice the lines that make the shapes. And remember that they come out of the ground. Now when you're ready, you can choose the colors that you're going to need. I'm just using crayon, but you can use whatever supplies you have at home. Notice the colors of the stems. I noticed some pinkish brown in there. Notice the buds and the different colors and the different shades of green. I've gone ahead and chosen some different greens, some pink, some brown, and even some yellow to where I can even enhance some of the yellow pigment that the dandelion already left. I really like to mix and blend the colors as I go through filling in my composition, thinking about what I actually see. You could add a little pink with a little brown, maybe a little green on top. If you have a variety of greens, try using the darker one for the veins and the leaves and then coloring in with a lighter one. Just some ideas as you finish coloring in your beautiful dandelion composition. I'd like to show you guys how to create a field of dandelions. You're going to need the same type of supplies and your paper can go in either direction. I want you guys to think about space and filling your paper. Think about some of the things you've learned about when things are closer to you, they are bigger, and further away, they're smaller. Let's say you wanted to create a field of dandelions using that concept. You would want to start with your bigger ones towards you and the smaller ones further away. So I'm going to take this little guy and I'm going to start kind of rubbing or squishing and making some really big ones right here near the front of my paper. As I go into the distance, I'm going to just make them a little smaller. I'm just going to kind of randomly pop them around. Looks like I'm running out of color, so I'm going to grab another one of these to squish around. There we go. Now as I head to the back, I'm going to do little tiny squishies. And I can load it up as much or as little as I'd like. All right. Now I'm ready to turn these into flowers. So boys and girls, take a look at your dandelion. And again, we want to think about how we're going to make these little squishies look more like this. You could take time and really do all those individual petals, or like me, I just kind of like to do a scribbly sort of zigzag line that radiates from the center, or even little dashed lines, almost like a firework. One way you guys could do it is kind of just start in the center and kind of radiate out from that center using a bunch of short lines. If you really want to exaggerate it as you come out and out, go longer and longer. That could be one way. You might even want to try a couple of these techniques on a separate sheet of paper to see what you really like first. The other way, let me hold that up for you guys. The other way I really like is when you go into the center with sort of this little zigzag kind of scribbly line, and then you just keep going. And you keep going around it and around it. Again, you are the artist and I want you to do it in your style. I sort of like this kind of abstract, sort of sketchy style. And if you go a little bit outside of your squishy, you could even add a little bit more dandelion yellow, or when we go in to add a little bit of color, you could use another yellow to enhance it as well. So you could use both of these and kind of change it up throughout, or maybe you want to stick with one style. I'm going to go ahead and zoom this up and get these ready for the next step. Notice I'm adding some stems by just adding some lines that sort of curve a little bit. I'm not worried about them being perfectly straight because these guys aren't usually perfectly straight either. You could add some of this that you sort of see at the top if you wanted for some extra detail with some little lines. That could give it a little extra, especially the ones that are closest to us. The ones in the back, you can really decide, how much or how little stem you want to see. Maybe you create some texture to show grass. That could be a great way to fill up all that empty space, especially if you plan on using color. So I'll show you guys that in a minute. Remember that if you're adding stems with the ones behind, they should stop at the flower that is in front of them. not drawing through it. So example, just like that. Another thing I want to point out to you guys before we talk about that grass texture are the leaves. Now these leaves do not come from the stem. They actually grow from the ground. So let's take a look. We've got this sort of jagged kind of line, and it's a little rounded at the top and tapered at the bottom. So I'm going to add a few kind of in here. I'm just going to come up and sort of do this sort of jagged kind of scoop line like that. Add maybe another one in here. Maybe I only see part of it in one area. You could add a few kind of disappearing behind some of these other ones near the front. So you could add a lot or a little. You might also want to think about these buds. Here, this is a better one here. They kind of come off in a little scoop and a little rounded on the end. That could be fun to add. And when you're ready, you just want to gather some of the colors that we talked about before. And I like to go in with many different shades of green, especially to show that texture in the background, maybe darkening in some of my pencil lines and adding some different shades of green on top. I know the lighting's not the best, but you'll see in a moment that I have filled in my entire composition, thinking about variety and really just having fun by adding some color. I hope you guys have an awesome time creating art with dandelions. I can't wait to see what you create. Don't forget to post on our Padlet page.